of ideas and expression from student voices rising within the discipline of sociology. It is a customized forum of learning and exploration and stands to represent a medium of free exchange of sociological thought and perspective. Dissent is necessary not only for democracy, it is necessary for the survival of human race. These lines by Professor Sundar Sarukkai aptly describe the ideology which gave shape to this year's edition of Meraki. This year, we at Meraki felt the need to encourage independent thinking, critical questioning, and give voices to our ideas. We wish to look at dissent beyond its physical manifestation of protest rallies and campaigns and seek to engage with dissent as an ideology, as a philosophy, as a way of thinking, and in everyday actions. After having to postpone the release in early March due to lockdown, we are delighted to finally share this year's edition with you all. We are extremely grateful to Professor Sundar Sarukkai for joining us and agreeing to release the magazine. Before we begin with the release and the lecture, I would like to invite our principal, Dr. Sister Rosalie, to say a few words.
A very good morning to each one of you. First of all, I thank and congratulate the Department of Sociology, JMC, staff and students for organizing this special talk on the occasion of the release of Meraki, the annual magazine of the Department of Sociology. In spite of the lockdown and all the unprecedented situation, you are not ready to give up. Congratulations. You overcome and cope with every situation. I appreciate your initiatives. We are honored with the presence of Professor Sundar Sarukkai with us. Thank you so much, sir, for sparing your valuable time with us, sharing your insights and experience with us on the topic, are others necessary? The plain answer would be yes. We depended on our parents and other caregivers right from the time of our birth. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, farmers, carpenters, bankers, engineers who built the dams and bridges, and the bags and books we use in everyday life. And what about teachers? The list is endless. But the list does not end here. With all the material things around us, we cannot live alone. Let us now begin the day with a small prayer. Almighty God, we come before you with gratitude for all the temporal and spiritual blessing we received throughout our life. Very often we have taken things for granted. Today we intercede for the whole world suffering from the virus which brought the whole world in a standstill. God, our creator and healer, we come before you. Heal our bodies and souls. We pray for all the doctors, nurses, for our government, and all the volunteers who work to save people safe. For all those who lost their livelihood, for each one of us, we pray, so that we are able to live healthy and happy, a meaningful life. Once again, I thank and congratulate the staff and students who worked hard to make this magazine Meraki a successful reality. May this magazine be a source of inspiration not only to the Department of Sociology but everyone around us. May we become sensitive to the needs of others. Wish you all the best and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Sister Rosalie, for those kind words. A very good afternoon to everyone here. Thank you so much for joining in. My name is Avantika Jhunjhunwala, and I am a member of the Editorial Board of Meraki. I will first be introducing the magazine to you with a little bit of screen sharing. I will also briefly introduce the editorial board of the magazine who came together as a team to bring this magazine and event to fruition. And finally, of course, I will introduce to you our guest speaker for today and invite him to start the lecture. So this 2020 issue of the magazine is very special, of course, due to the hard work we have put into it, but also because we have introduced some very special features this year. Firstly, we have some extraordinary sections in the magazine this year, including one with contributions from our alumni and another with two key interviews with prominent intellectuals conducted exclusively for this magazine by the members of the editorial board. Secondly, the magazine for the first time is bilingual with pieces both in Hindi and English. And finally, for a wider readership and accessibility, the e-copy of the magazine is going to be available on our department social media pages as well as mailed to our department alumni. Please do check it out or write to us if you'd like to receive an e-copy. So I will now screen share the magazine here so as to show you all some snippets from inside. Just a minute. Okay, I hope you can see my screen now. Here is the magazine in front of you. You have the front cover of the magazine on your screen, which was especially made by our classmate from third year sociology honors, Ishita Mohan. She couldn't join us for the event today due to some personal reasons, but has asked me to give you all her message about the cover, which I will now read out to you. This is a message from Ishita, who has made the cover. Hello everyone, I would first like to congratulate the Meraki team, teachers and students whom I have seen work day and night to bring this magazine to culmination. The idea behind the cover is a play of Foucault's idea of the panopticon. In a prison, the prisoners are locked inside their cells and have very restricted view of what is going on outside. The guard, a figure of authority and power on the other hand, is stationed in a watchtower in the middle of the prison, which gives him a 360-degree view of all of the cells. He can see what the prisoners are up to, and any behavior not in accordance to the rule is punished. So this cover is a sort of reversal of place and roles. We get an image of a person with a thought that stands apart from the mainstream, held in place at the center of the prison in the watchtower, while cells represent the overarching authority structure which refuses to acknowledge its own shortcomings. Indeed, it prisoners. Actually, we're all prisoners, and those who stand in the center have a wider view of the situation, can only attempt to break the bar for the others, even when there is a lack of understanding by those prisoners who have pledged loyalty to the prison authority. The ability to see beyond what is visible is symbolized by the eyes that stare straight ahead, while there are many others who stare at them from behind the bars as if keeping a lookout for when those in the watchtower will misstep. Of course, the abstract nature of the bright colors do not really give way to original thought. You may have thought of it as depicting something entirely else, but that is the point of art and art in descent, at least according to me. Everyone is free to have their own interpretations because art is meant just for that. The image is not meant to depict a finality, but be a starting point of discussion on the idea which the magazine stands for today. So that was a message from Ishita, and I would like to take the opportunity to heartily thank her for the cover, the front and the back covers, and the sketches she has contributed for the magazine. So now you will see the editorial note on your screen. We talk extensively here about the theme and the features of the issue of the magazine. You will also see a picture of the editorial board on your screen, and I will take this opportunity to introduce each of our members. We have Gayatri, Jeelam, Avita, Anisha, and myself, Avantika, from third year. From second year, we have Smiley, Akshita, and Ananya. And from first year, we have Kavya. I would also like to mention that our first and second year members have worked especially hard as the technical team for this event. I would also like to mention our mentors, Dr. Rennie and Dr. Jessie, who have guided us along the way. As you can see, we have various sections in the magazine, and I will briefly take you through them. First, we have Dissent in the Daily, which addresses various ways in which we dissent in our lives through art, comedy, clothes, etc. Secondly, we have another section, very interesting section called I Question, Therefore I Am, with some critically thought out pieces. We have another section called The Alumni Speaks, with pieces from our alumni of the batch 2018. And of course, we have the final and the most extraordinary section, Conversation Cafe, which has the exclusive interviews. The first interview is with distinguished sociologist and fiction writer, Professor Susan Viswanathan, on teaching, writing, and dissent. She's here with us in this event now. And the second interview is with scholar of cartoons, Mr. Unamati Syamasundar, on cartoons in dissent, especially focused on his book No Laughing Matter, the Ambedkar Cartoons, 1932 to 1956. The book is a must read, and we have enjoyed reading the book on the process of interviewing him. I would like to take this moment to also mention that taking these interviews was a very inspiring experience for the editorial members, as we got the opportunity to speak to these great minds and truly get an insight into their ideas and into their thinking. Finally, we have the back cover of the magazine, also specially made by Ishita Mohan. So this was the magazine, and I hope you had a good look at it. So I would like to now move on to the most awaited part of today's event, and would like to introduce to you our guest speaker for today, Professor Sundar Sarukkai. Professor Sarukkai was till 2019 a professor of philosophy at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, where he taught courses on philosophy of science. He was also the founder director at the Manupal Center for Philosophy and Humanities. His work is primarily in the field of philosophy of natural and social sciences. He is the author of the following books: Translating the World, Science and Language, Philosophy of Symmetry, Indian Philosophy and Philosophy of Science, What is Science, and two books co-authored with renowned political scientist Gopal Guru, The Cracked Mirror, an Indian Debate on Experience and Theory, and most recently, Experience, Caste and the Everyday Social, both published by the Oxford University Press. He also co-edited the book Science and Narratives of Nature, East and West. He is an editorial advisory board member of the Leonardo book series on science and art, published by MIT Press, and the series editor for Science and Technology Studies, Routledge. His book, titled J.R.D. Tata and the Ethics of Philanthropy, will be published this summer. He has also been active in outreach programs to take philosophy to various communities and places, including philosophy for children, and bringing philosophy to the public through his writings in the media and, of course, through his initiative Barefoot Philosophers. I would request Professor Sarukkai to officially release and show the magazine to our audience here. Please do turn on your audio and video and start the much awaited lecture, Are Others Necessary? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Avantika. Can you hear me? Can you see me? I can't see myself on the screen here.
Yes, sir. We can hear and see you both.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks to Kavya and Jesse for starting this program, and to Dr. Sister Rosalie for her inaugural comments. Very briefly, she has in one word answered the question I posed as the title of this talk, Are Others Necessary? I'm very grateful for her introductory comments. And also I must thank, most importantly, Remy, who has been, been in touch with me about this for a long time. And my engagement with him on his work has also been for over years. And so I'm very glad to be part of this initiative to release this journal today. I think there was a plan that I would be in Delhi in March to do this with all of you, but unfortunately we couldn't do it because of the lockdown. But I'm really delighted that you have given this opportunity for me to engage with all of you today. Rennie also said that I should release this, and I really don't know how to release it. One way I think he said is to keep this in front of the camera and assume that it is released. Does this work? Okay, that's a wonderful way of entering into this very complex world we are in now, in a world in which we are so far removed from each other, but yet so close to each other. And that is really the background to trying to make sense of this question which I posed today. Rennie did suggest that, I could probably talk about something in the context of what's happening now with the COVID pandemic. And if there was one question which seemed to be coming back to me in very many different ways, it was this question of sociality. It was the question of being with others, not being able to be with others, and all these related questions which people have been talking about. I've heard that there are many cases where people have felt mentally very low. People have felt different kinds of emotions in confronting this kind of being locked down. But on the other hand, I also know of cases in which people have felt certain kinds of liberatory capacities in this lockdown. So when I'm asking the question, are others necessary? I am actually trying to make sense of what my experience was in the COVID. So I want to start with my story, how it felt when this lockdown began. I must say that when the lockdown began, I enjoyed it. I didn't have to travel, and with given Bangalore's traveling, it is, how it is. And not getting out and getting stuck in traffic itself was a major boon. And to me, a very important part of it was that it gave me some time to sit by myself. And it had a great impact on the city. Bangalore suddenly became silent. And we didn't even realize how noisy it actually was, with not just with the traffic, with the metro works going on, with all kinds of sounds around you all the time, including sounds of building, labor of various kinds. Not only did Bangalore become silent, suddenly the dust level decreased, and as many have reported in many cities, I saw birds and I heard birds which I thought were no longer present in Bangalore. And to me, the days of the post-lockdown was filled with this kind of a wonderful sense of silence in the sun. sitting in the window, looking out of the window, looking really at no one on the streets. Just enjoyed being alone. But it is also, I realized there was something very important happening during this process, not just to me, but to many people I knew. I realized that what was happening is there was a slow process of discarding the unnecessary. There were so many ways by which many things which we would take as necessary for our day-to-day existence, for our everyday life, seemed no longer necessary. And it was not even a conscious attempt to stop doing many of the things because it just didn't happen. There were no conditions for them to arise. And as many again have noted in every household, for many, consumption dropped. The kind of eating habits, the amount of things which we want to eat through the day, going out and doing these things, etc., for a very large middle class and the upper class of India, for many of them, the very idea, the very principles of consumption dropped. And one person who's very well off and runs various organizations, he suddenly told me one day, after 2 months of this, he said, you know what, it's really amazing how little I spent in a month during this lockdown. And he was not saying this as a kind of a saving that he has done. It's just the fact that he didn't spend. So this kind of removal of consumptions of various kinds is not just in terms of material consumptions or food consumption. It's our consumptions of various things within ourselves, with ideas, with conflicts, with differences. Many things seemed unimportant. Many things dropped down by the wayside. And of course, social interactions vanished. And this is actually a very interesting period for me to look at because I live in a upper middle class in Bangalore, in an area which was built quite some time back. So it's a bit of an older type of kinds of houses and so on here. And they have not become modernized in terms of many apartments and so on. And there are always people visiting other, I remember our neighbor's house, there are relatives and friends keep dropping by and so on. Now all those sounds vanished, all those people vanished all around us. And I think, to me, the most important aspect of sitting in the silence to me was it showed the excesses of our everyday life, unthought excesses of our everyday life. And it made me reflect on what are all this extra baggage we unnecessarily keep carrying out. But having said this, I must also say that I had a window. I had a window from which I could look at the world outside. I would look at a few people walking on the streets once in a while, mainly vendors, vegetable vendors, and sometimes see people rarely in other houses, small glimpses of them. And then a very interesting phenomenon happened in our place. Because we were all cooped up, and many of these houses here are largely one or, they may at the most have one floor above the ground floor. So almost all the houses here have terrace. And one day I went up to the terrace and I thought, if I'm not able to walk outside, I should at least, especially since I was eating all the day, I should probably walk in the terrace. So I go to the terrace and I start walking. And then slowly, day after day, what I see is more and more people coming out to walk in their terraces. I've never seen our environment in that way. And it was a very interesting exercise for me because none of us were talking to each other, but I could go on the terrace and see all the many terraces around me because I said most of them are this one floor building. And there are young people, old people, men, women, just some of them walking very briskly, some of them lounging around, some of them just walking up and down, some children playing. And the whole society, as it were, moved to the terrace from the ground. But then what I saw of that terraced view of our society, of this particular locality, was completely different. It was a completely different experience of engaging and seeing those people. And we were not speaking, but we were all aware. And I began to wonder, what kind of awareness is it? In what sense were we aware of each other? And to me, I think one of the most important insights from my personal perspective, which came was that we were all aware of being seen. We were not there to show you how fast we were running, how many rounds we were doing around our terrace, and how fitness conscious we were. But we were all aware that we were objects of sight for others. And you might say, why would that matter? Why do I want to go stand on a terrace and be seen by people when I'm locked in a house for 24 hours without being seen by anybody? I would suggest that we look at this question, okay? Not as a final conclusive answer, just reflect on this point. That to us, all of us who went on the terrace, it was not as much the importance of seeing others. It was not that important for me to see others. We were anyway seeing it on our TVs, we were watching it on our net with so many social media things happening. And you could look out of the window and see a few people here and there, and many people are on the phone all the time. So it's not that we were not seeing others. But this raises a very interesting question about the importance of being seen and not just of seeing others. So this is a very interesting question, which of course many philosophers have thought about. And this is this very interesting dynamics between to see and to be seen. So I can see something, but at the same time, I am also seen by somebody else. And in a very profound sense, without going deep into this, I can at least highlight the point that this is very similar to the problem. I mean, it raises a very deep problem. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, it raises the problem of being unseen, just like being untouched. This whole processes of which we know as social science students, you know much about these, about the questions of untouchability and so on. And there is a very interesting, I mean, the problem which it poses to us, and it is something which Gopal and me discussed in our Cracked Mirror more extensively, is this what kind of a problem is the problem of being unseen and being untouched? What kind of a problem is it? And this is example of what happened here. Was it something which told me that, look, much more than my seeing others, I want them all to see me. To see me as what? Not to see my dress, not to see how, I'm walking around, but just to be seen. And I'll give you another example which happened around this time. I think it was probably after one month of the lockdown. And generally, most people followed it in my locality. Suddenly, one night at around 9 o'clock, there was a huge sound, and in the opposite house, a coconut tree fell down. And as the tree fell down, it fell on some metal railings, and there was a massive sound. So obviously, a lot of people came out of the house. And then they found that nothing much had happened except the tree had fallen, and that there was an iron cover which had fallen down. And nobody was hurt. There's nothing serious about it. But what was very interesting to me was this, that from looking at it from the house, when they opened the door and peeped out at it, soon people started coming out of their gates. So we all came out of the gates to that house, and there were about 15-20 people around that house. And I think what was very interesting for me in a locality which is not, these 15-20 people don't come together in general. We have never met each other in these kinds of, in the road particularly. And what to me was very interesting was, after the first few minutes of saying something about the tree, there was really nothing much to say. We just saw it had fallen. And then there was a great reluctance of people to walk back. There was nothing to say. They were just hanging around. And it seemed as if people didn't just want to say, okay, it's all done, let me go back home. It was, after a very long time, they were actually with a group of people. And of course, nobody was wearing masks. So they just came out of the house to see this. But that reluctance to leave was very much present. And, this is the phenomena which I want to really explore in the context of the COVID. Because, like as I said, I enjoyed being silent, but after a month and whatever many weeks, you keep spending time with yourself and with the digital media and with the TV and so on, a kind of restlessness begins. And this is a restlessness which was captured in many different ways by many of my friends. It leads to what I see as a very different type of angst. A friend of mine who is really a binge watcher, who really likes to just lie down on his sofa and just watch one TV show after the other. Once I was asking him what are the latest TV shows he watched in the midst of all this. You know what he said, which was very surprising to me? He said, I can't watch Netflix, man. How much can I keep watching? And to me, that was really a surprise from a guy who I thought only wanted to watch these things day after day, especially after this lockdown, after this hectic work schedule which he used to have earlier. I've had people who have told me, friends who have said, how much internet news can you keep reading? And they see, of course, there is an enormous amount of stuff at our fingertips. You can watch and see so many things. But we keep watching and seeing them. How much can we do this? And what were they all saying? They were pointing out to something which I think is extremely important. They were talking about a particular kind of being bored, being tired of these types of interactions. And when you see that, you can just ask yourself a simple question. What type of boredom is this? After all, there is so many exciting things are available at their fingertips. What kind of a boredom is it? What is it that they are tired of? And one answer, there are, of course, psychologists, I'm sure will tell you many things, etc. I'm just going to work with just one small stream, one single string of an idea, to try and answer this question. And something which is very related to this wonderful journal which has been produced by the students. There is one, you could say, one way of looking at it. So let me at least look at this particular aspect without worrying too much of how correct it is, how wrong it is, etc. One is to say that we are bored and tired of being with, I'm using the word being with as one word, being hyphenated with. We are bored and tired of being with things with which I can't interact. Not interact in the sense that I can't manage them. It is that, in what sense do they not interact? If I'm being bored and tired of being with things which do not respond to me. They're all there around me. This wonderful world of this digital world is around me. The TV world, the media world is around me. And they're producing things which occupy some of my time. But they do not respond to me. They are there, but they're indifferent to me. How long am I going to be around things which are indifferent to me? So for people who tend to call this as social media, the sociality present in these kinds of instruments in which we immerse ourselves, we need to understand this particular kind of a relationship we have towards technologies of particularly of this kinds. You could look at even the other types of things, just ordinary movies and watch TV shows, etc. They're not addressing me. They're not speaking to me. And it only points to a very simple fact, which I'm sure many of us have experienced, which is if you're sitting in a room and there is many people there and they're all talking amongst themselves and they just don't address you. They don't react to you. You could be another chair in the room. They just walk around you. You're saying something, they're not listening to you. And you can't interject in what they are saying because it's already happening. We get restless when we're ignored, when others around us act as if we don't exist. What I'm trying to say is that this is a problem which has something deeply to do with the nature of human existence. When we are not seen, when we are not touched, when we are not spoken to, these are not conditions which we like. These are conditions which affect us very deeply, including, as I said, not seen, not touched, acting as if you're not there around them. People, not even shaking your hands or giving you a hug or treating you with silence. The TV, so one way of looking at it, okay, and I'm trying to avoid making it sound as if I'm saying something profound. I'm not. I'm saying something which is very ordinary, which many of you have experienced. But I want to use a particular term to talk about it. And I don't think it's profound just because I use that term, because other philosophers have tried to make it very profound. I'm just using it as a common word, a common talk between us. So one way to see this is to say that TV, films, and the digital world, which have replaced the social world while I'm sitting inside lockdown, the TV, films, and the digital world removes the presence of me to myself. These occlude me to myself. It negates myself appearing. It negates myself presencing in front of me. I am no longer present in front of me when I am in such media like this, when I'm immersed in these kinds of, and it's, I mean, I'm not talking about this pure in a psychological sense, but psychologically you know what it means. You know, when you get lost when you're watching a movie, you're totally lost in something else. That awareness of being present, awareness of being open to myself. So one way to express this feeling is to say that I'm literally lost in front of them. I'm literally lost when I am with them. Now, this becomes, I can recognize this as a problem. The problem that I am not being acknowledged. My existence is not being acknowledged in this world, even though I may be surrounded by all these distractions around me. When in my ordinary life, you might say, well, in ordinary life, so much of it is happening. How is it different from here? In ordinary life, that we are so much immersed in our engagement with others that we don't not just recognize this problem. Many times we come in to lose ourselves. You come after hard days of work and you want to lose yourself in these films and media and so on. You don't want to be reminded. You don't want to be present to yourself. So, but it is this loss of my own self to me that one might say leads to this restlessness from overindulgence with oneself. And in a sense, this question of loneliness and the related question around it comes from this loss of a very important existential capacity related to being a human. Because this particular existential condition is related to a mysterious aspect of living things, something which must speak to all of you as students of sociology. And this mysterious aspect of living things is this idea of the sense of sociality, the feeling of being with others. And at the root, this particular idea of the social, that word which seems to have so much importance in all the disciplines that you study, and a word which is also very ambiguous, which is very dispersed in its meaning. And through the history of the development of disciplines like sociology, a kind of a word which has always led to either a kind of a rejection and saying, look, we are not interested in this idea of the social, let's look at some thing called society, but recognizing that without it, it is impossible to construct ways of talking about society. And if this is something very interesting. This is a point by which we began our book, our new book with Gopal Guru and myself, which is called Experience, Caste and the Everyday Social. And it really began this question of asking, what is this thing called the social? And the word social is used in so many ways. Social media, social justice, like the social sciences. There are hundreds of ways in which we attach the word social to things. And yet, if you ask somebody, what is the meaning of the word social in each one of them, they may all mean something very different. And if social is really such a problem for the social sciences, why is it that this word becomes so important to characterize social phenomena? I'm doing the same thing by calling something a social phenomenon. So that was a question we began with, and we try and make sense of what is this kind of a social. I'm not going to talk about that book. I'm just pointing out that this problem of a thing which is related to the idea of sociality and social it's a very deep, interesting problem which should interest all of you who are all as sociology students who are here today. So instead of talking about the larger questions of the social, which I think we have done somewhat extensively in our book, I want to come back to that one specific aspect related to this, linking the idea of the presence which I talked about, that is presencing myself to me, making myself aware of myself, standing in making myself stand in front of me, right? Now, here I want to talk about this relation between the social and presence. And this is a question which has been of great interest, particularly to theater people. And you know that one of the enduring debates within performance studies and theater studies has been this very difficult problem of characterizing the idea of presence. What does presence actually mean? How do you make present the actor on stage? And it has influenced, and some of the most important acting techniques by great stalwarts like Stanislavski and Grotowski were all deeply influenced by the ideas of presence and defining what is it to be present on stage, for the actor to be present. And they draw upon very many different traditions to understand what could this meaning of presence be. And within our own scholarship, we should look at Rustam Barucha's own take on the critique of these kind of approaches and his own understanding of the idea of presence in the context of the stage. But I'm just saying that because we know that there has been some very interesting thinking about it in the context of stage. But I want to extend this a little bit more to the question of the idea of presence in the idea of the social. And to do that, I'll again go back to what happened around my house when the lockdown was opened and people rushed out. Even today, there are a large number of people immediately ran out, some with masks, some without masks, and that conflict is continuing. And they went to the market. There's a very small roadside market where people sit on the streets near my house. And that's where large number of people come for a walk and go to the market. And when I went there with the mask, and it was a very interesting experience for me because there are many of them whom I have seen before walking, etc. But there was a completely different sense of being there, all of us being there, occupying that space. There was a kind of a fear, a kind of a diffidence, and there's a lot of bravado. There are still people, both young and old, who just refuse to follow any of the social distancing or wearing masks. The only way I can make sense of it is to think that they have a sense of bravado to say, hey, nothing's going to happen to me. But still, there is a kind of underlying kind of a fear, a kind of a suspicion for many people. So you want to be very careful when you pick something up or when you touch. And one person called me and said, the biggest problem is dealing with currency notes. Don't ever give notes and take change from people, and it's impossible for us to do that, right? In the kind of the world we live in. But there was this kind of an ambiguity between all of this. And what seemed to be very interesting, at least from my observation, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but, like a bad theorist, I want to use some empirical phenomena to fit what I want to say. So I also thought that there are people who are extremely happy to be there for nothing else, not for talking, exchanging news, etc., just for hanging out with others, just being around others, just walking around others. Nobody is speaking. They're not talking to them. They're not telling them their usual stuff. And normally they're all groups of people keep talking and walking and so on. It was just being with others. And to me, watching this phenomena, it says something very important about our need to be with others. And my wanting to be with the other, I would suggest, is not just to see another person. I didn't go there to see other persons, but like as I said earlier in the phenomenon of the terrace, so my wanting to be with the other is not just to see another person, but to be seen by that person. We were all seeing there when we were walking together. We were seeing and being seen. It was a kind of a recognition of our existence. And it was not, we didn't do this in the park, all the people there. It was not to go searching for the other person who is there, but it is actually to discover the presence of myself that I was there. And in that, there is a great lesson. And I think that's the lesson in which I will try and present before in the next few minutes. And that for me was that it is not about discovering presence. And I think, a large amount of the debate on presence has perhaps missed this point. But to me, what it really showed is that it was about recognizing that all presence, this presenting myself, being present, that all presence is really co-presence. There is really no sense of just being present to myself. All presence is really co-presence. In that, I recognize me and the other as being co-present. It is, my presence arises in the co-presence of me and the other. Some people might say, respond to this in other different ways, of course, in terms of how our self and ego is created by others, etc. But I want to present it using this particular language. So in the market and the road, when we were all there with those people, we are not friends. I don't know most of them, but still, that's still ... We don't know what it is, but still something else is happening. We present ourselves as together when I present myself to the other. So why would I want to say something like this? Something which may seem so convoluted and confused. I want to say this others because when the lockdown happened and people started thinking about what does it actually mean to have others around you, we recognized one thing very immediately, that we look at others all the time. We often look at others as serving our needs. Society becomes a de facto mechanism for serving our needs. You want a shop to buy something, there has to be a shop which sells it. You want a restaurant to eat something, you have a restaurant which is already present. So society produces stuff which takes care of our individual needs. But I think the lockdown showed something else more important. Even when this was over, when this kind of the serving of our needs was really cut off to us, and there were no restaurants where we could go and eat what you wanted, they also showed us something else, a very important lesson about being human, which very often we forget in this everyday living. The excess of running from one thing to the other, living surrounded by million things around us. Because it made us forget a very important part of the other, very important part of being human, which is that the others complete us. This sounds really trite and cliched because the phrase where complete us I've heard most often is in Hollywood films, romance films, and it makes me cringe when I hear that. But it is also true. It's a larger truth about human beings, that the others for us, the others are important because they show us what we can be, how to be and how not to be in situations that will arise in the future. It shows us how a very idea of a human can act in situations which has not happened to us yet. It may be happening to various other people around us. It shows us what I am, not what the other person is. So to extend this, one way to say this, and it sounds a bit dramatic, but just as an example, when people look at somebody, let's say a cancer patient, and the person who's looking at them may not have cancer, but they recognize what it is for humans to fight it, what it is for humans to undergo that. Not because it happens to me, not because it's my experience, but because I can see this through others. And others are very, very important in this particular sense. So it is not really about this naive sense of servicing and serving our needs, but in a larger sense of completing us in this sense, which I told you. And thirdly, this is also deeply related to the sense of vulnerability. And one of the things we argue in our book, in that Experience, Caste, and the Everyday Social, is that in a chapter, the final chapter called Maitri, where we are exploring the idea of quote unquote friendship between socials, not between individuals, we explore this point that, the idea of the social, the very idea of what it is social, what is to be social, it has a deep relationship to desire and vulnerability. And vulnerability is something we know has a very strong connection to desire, to social. When communities are vulnerable, people come together in very many different ways, very, very powerful ways. You can see this again in COVID. There are people who are actually in localities, even before the government or the police is enforcing, this lockdown, this exclusion zones and so on. There are local people within communities who are doing it. In fact, as I'm sure you would have heard, many examples of how local residents become, vigilantes and protective mechanisms of some kind, in something which they may never have done to their communities before, to their localities before. There is a particular kind of a sense of the social which is very related to vulnerability. And the deeper the vulnerability which is available, which happens within a particular community, the deeper the idea of the social. as a sense of being with. So you can already see that there are very important reasons why we can understand that this very idea of co-presencing of myself with the other. And I want to conclude with just a short point connecting this co-presence with the idea of dissent. Because, there are, as I said, many interesting pieces in this thing. I'm so glad. I must also say this, which I should have said before, that it is really remarkable and I think something which is very hopeful to see that students are able to produce a magazine on dissent, or at least a theme issue on dissent, supported by the institution, supported by your principal, the college, and so on, and your teachers. I think that's really remarkable, especially at a time and in a place where all of you are situated, in which the question of dissent has had obviously very deep problems. Now, I've actually began all this in order to try and understand this larger question of dissent. Because very often we think dissent is about language, it's about disagreements, saying I don't agree with you, I want to have my own say, etc. So dissent has often been understood has been described and explained in the context of language and gestures. I mean, you could have non-verbal gestures which are also very indicative of dissent, anger, for example. But without confusing this issue about dissent and without negating the importance of dissent, I want us to reflect on another interesting point related to this. I want to look at, while this is true about the question of language and gestures and communicating dissent, disagreements, there is also an existential manifestation of dissent. Why is this dissent very important? Why does dissent come out in the forms it does in these mechanisms of language and so on? And there is the existence of there's an existential manifestation of dissent, because dissent is also about being with, that being hyphenated with. Dissent is actually a statement about sociality. But with what kind of sociality? Dissent is about being with others different from you. Dissent is not just about disagreement. Okay, it's a very important aspect of those questions about disagreement, building upon arguments, and so on. But primarily, at least this is a suggestion which I want to pose in front of you, is that primarily dissent is also about being with others different from you. It is the coexistence of difference. That coexistence of difference, just the fact that you are with others who are different, that is the primary existential and, without sounding very jargonish here, ontological foundation of dissent. What I mean is, at the most basic sense, it is this foundation which leads to the very idea of dissent, which in its performative aspect, when it is performed through language and gestures, protests, etc., has a particular form, but in its fundamental existential ontological sense, it is just the coexistence of difference. And therefore, why I am saying this is, if you look at it this way, then the greatest challenge to dissent, to this is not just to dissent, but to the idea of being social, to the idea of being social itself. And so therefore, the greatest challenge, not just to dissent, but also to the idea of being social, comes from sameness, from imposing sameness. This is the problem of digital media, things like Zoom, online platforms, in some sense like this. And one way to understand what we mean by these public spaces, in all these kinds of meetings, largely we know who to allow, who we do not allow. They are a lot like gated communities. Much of this digital media is a gated community. And there is a very good chance that we allow people like us into them. In contrast, a public space, truly a social space, a truly social space, can be defined as one where you have no control on who can enter, where people who are different come and occupy the place, even if we do not like them, if we disagree with them. In other words, social space by definition, is a space where we are forced to be with people you may not want to be with. And that's, that is a very fundamental definition of the social there. It's not about saying social is about, being friends, being with others, people, you're a very social person and so on. No, social is this phenomena where you are forced to be with people you may not want to be with. And it goes back to this idea of this being with question, which I began with. So, and that is why it's a true exemplification of being with. It is an existential condition. And what we know and what people in power know very well is this lesson that we have just said, that if there is one danger to dissent and being social, it is the idea of sameness. Sameness destroys. Sameness, complete agreement destroys. And, people who are in power know this very well. Because what are we doing now in our institutions and in our universities today? We are making them the same. You want to hire the same kind of people. You want to hire the people who will either be in complete agreement or listen to what you say or say exactly the same thing you say. I mean, this whole phenomena of yes people, yes men and women, surrounding oneself with that is becoming a cultural phenomena across institutions. I mean, part of my own struggle with institutions is this inability to understand that differences and diversity adds to something very important. And in a sense, as we saw before, just being with oneself, being with the same people that you know, destroys your sense of self. It does not allow you to present yourself to yourself. In other words, sameness is not about doing bad things to others. It's a destruction of our own self when you give in to a particular notion of sameness. In other words, sameness is nothing but the lockdown of society. It's a lockdown of our culture. It's a lockdown of our culture where we are surrounded, where we have control through this media on who we enter. We only talk to people whom we like to talk to. And that notion goes completely against any meaningful idea of what is social and the ideas of sociality. So what I want to end with is just to say that it is this ontological understanding, this existential primary understanding of dissent that we need to begin with. Away from these questions of various things around it, about difference and disagreements and so on, it is just this very basic sense of sameness and difference, and understanding the socialities associated with sameness and difference. I think I've taken enough of the time, which are almost approximately the time I was given. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for patiently not only listening, but for having produced such a wonderful journal, which inspired me to think through and learn about this particular topic. Thank you, Rennie, once again, and to all your students for this wonderful opportunity to share these ideas. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. You've introduced us to some very thought-provoking ideas and concepts. Likewise, we have a couple of questions addressed to you. Has the social simply moved online and manifested itself through various social media platforms? Apps like Instagram, TikTok are serving as platforms for self-expression, social engagement, and validation. While the nature of engagement might be different, isn't the core human need for social fulfillment met?
Is the core what? Sorry?
Isn't the core human need for social fulfillment met through these online media platforms?
Yeah, so as I said, I think the online media platforms are very interesting, and I think they are, of course, a little more complex media than watching TV, for example. That there are far more interactive platforms which are available to you. But if I look at this, the ways in which we talked about, one, the idea of co-presencing with the other, the fact that others, the recognition of myself by the other, in psychological terms, you can see this happening through social media, through abuse in social media, for example, and so on. But To me, I really don't think that there is a meaningful social which is being presented at all through these kinds of technological intervention. I think in our book also, Gopal and me refer to various other types of the socials that are created, like the surrogate social and things like that, which seems to happen through these media. It seems to mimic certain notions of the social, but in a sense, it doesn't really capture that. But to say that and not be told that it's because you're an old guy, you're saying all this because you're out of touch with what's happening with the young people, which may be very true, I don't deny that. But I would still say that to do that is to answer, what does it mean to be social? So I'm perfectly willing to say that we are missing out on a very important component of what's happening here. But for that, we have to understand what then does it mean to say that something is social and something is not social. And that's, as I said, one of the tasks which we set out in that book, which of course proved to be very complex and confusing to us ourselves. But hopefully we'll be able to think through some, especially as all of you has very bright future of sociology and as students in that, I'm sure you will come up with ways of thinking about it. So what I have done today is to show you one small way of thinking about it, perhaps meaningful, perhaps not, I don't know.
There's another question for you, sir.
Yeah.
Indian society is a very good example of othering. Though in the present situation, people might feel uncomfortable as others are not there. But we are happy to deny the existence of others from the perspective of caste. How do you look at this contradiction?
Not just from the perspective of caste, there is this othering has happened in so many different domains. Even within caste, we should remember it is probably a very big category. And again, as students of sociology, well, the caste itself is so fine-grained, like the jatis, and within jatis there are so many exclusion characteristics which happen there. So there is those kinds of notions are present, but I think one has to look at this question of othering in different ways. One is political, other one is a typical specific notions of social practice, other can be ideological. I am talking about an existential sense of being human and the role the other plays in it. And this is actually a paradox in many of these othering phenomena, where you may have people who are responding very deeply with somebody else, but it's still othered in a social dimension, in a very different dimension. I think a good example maybe I should add here, there's a new book by the musician T.M. Krishna. It's called Sebastian and Sons. I've just done a review for EPW for that. And so I was going through that book, and it's an interesting book. It's about the mridangam makers, and many of them are Dalit Christians, people who work with the skin. And there's a paradox of how the players, the performers and the musicians are largely Brahmin, and then they are engaging with this skin, which is very important part of mridangam, just like tabla in the North Indian instruments, right? And it's a book which is about the mridangam makers, not the musicians. It goes into great detail how they skin and how they do it, and the kind of specialized knowledge that it creates. And there is one paradox which I think even Krishna finds it difficult to engage with, which is that many of the workers themselves who are doing this, who are actually, great artisans, people with very, very unique knowledge, which very many others, even musicians, will not have, do not articulate the caste distinction in the way he would like them to articulate it, or in the way people working in caste might want them to articulate. So that's what I'm saying. So what I'm trying to say here is that this notion of the othering has many different directions. So they would say something like, oh, he was so humane to me, they were doing this to me, etc. At the same time, they are also recognized that socially there are certain practices which are hierarchical. So once if you open up this question of othering into the different dimensions, maybe it will give us a better handle on how to address this question.
So delving deeper into the same question, As you spoke about the concept of being social, there was an immense lack of action of the middle and upper middle classes towards the plight of the underprivileged. The lack of dissent and uproar against the government that came from these classes, can it be seen as lack of empathy and desire for a social only restricted to their caste and class group due to India's history and caste hierarchy, a feeling of superiority that cancels about a desire for a more egalitarian society?
Yeah, that is true. And I think when I look at what is happening with the Black Lives Matter protest movements and so on, I must say that I do feel disheartened. And, I am also part of it. I mean, I'm not saying this about others. I'm saying about myself. I'm disheartened because I don't see how such, not even just protest, how such consciousness, awareness is going to happen in our society when I'm seeing everything going backwards than what we had earlier, including the possibility of meaningful protest. And that's why this question of dissent was so important, right? So one way to answer this, and again, it's not an answer, but at least I can tell you the difficulty we had in making sense of this question was in fact one of our, the prime catalyst for our book with Gopal. I'm saying all this not to plug the book, but just to say that what we were doing in that book is really about some of these questions. Because there is a question about sociality of community. So you have, people belonging to some social group within caste, within religion, within various other subgroups. And we wanted to understand the question, what is the sociality of caste different from the sociality of religion? In other words, is the way people come together within caste groups different from the way people come together, or whatever that sense of the social is, within, let's say, religious communities, or within your own college, your own set of students who belong to JMC? And then is that coming together different from other forms of coming together? That kind of a question was very important. So, and that's really what we map out in a sense in the book, because to answer that, you have to understand how the very idea of the social is constructed, especially within Indian societies. And so a quick answer to that, because I don't want to always defer all answers, is that the one way to make sense of this is that this is how we argue for this, is that very often sociologists tend to think of the idea of the social primarily in opposition to the individual, right? It's an individual as a unit, and then you have the social as a group. And Gopal and me argue that it is not the right way of looking at it, that there is another term which mediates these two. And this is what you could see as a tripartite relationship between the individual, social, and the natural. In other words, every idea of the social you create and every belongingness to the social that you create creates a concomitant idea of the natural. And that leads to a very interesting dynamics of how to understand the different socialities. And definitely that same phenomena happens with the middle class and upper middle class, who are quite indifferent. I mean, who are quite indifferent to not just the migrants, but also for the labor who are working in their own house. The number of people who said we shouldn't be paying them salaries when they are not working here. Number of people who made snide comments that, they're anyway getting some 5 kilo rice, 10 kilo rice, etc. They are better off than me. When somebody said that, I was just like really furious. I said, don't even say it as a bloody joke, So, yeah, I mean, there is a very deep crisis about this kind of a social which I was talking about today, a dissentful social. That is a being with which is defined by difference and not sameness. That's the national social that you actually want, not this other kind of definitions of the nation. Nation is actually should be, at all, if it is useful terminology, it should really stand for this idea of a social space, that is creating the capacity of being with people we don't like and we don't agree with. That's the true definition of nation. And it is only through that if we had had that, then I'm sure our responses would have been very different.
Another question for you, sir. Why some socials manifested through sameness dominate our society? Is there something contradictory to our nature where we search for completion of self in the society?
Okay, very interesting question. Okay, really nice to engage with these questions, but okay, let me try and see how I can try and quickly answer this. Now, if the idea of the social, one way in which I would look at it this way is this, that the idea of the social begins with this idea of being with in some sense, that always has to be embodied or translated, or if you like another word, instantiated, converted into the societal. So the social has to be converted into the societal, right? So if the social, which is characterized by being with, has to be converted to the societal being with, okay, and that's really not happening at all. And that's not happening because of the way in which we understand the nature of a society and the way in which we understand we construct the institutions corresponding to society. But in the Indian case, there is another institution which is extremely influential. It is also it's also an institution which I think has also raised major challenges to sociology, which I'm sure all of you would have studied about it. And this is the institution of family. Okay. Definitely, I can tell you that in the context, for example, of caste and the continued propagation of values of caste and caste practices are very deeply driven as much by family as by other so-called caste leaders and so on. In fact, I think the whole questions of these one leader running these kinds of influencing everybody's caste orientations is not really right. I mean, it's very difficult to, I don't think it can be sustained in the manner in which it has been sustained. Families sustain it. And the authority of families are very different from the authority of any other external figure. And we know this as children. You might disagree with your parents, but you're still like, at the time it comes, I can't still say something, how can I go against them? I mean, look at that narrative which happens, for example, in marriages where, two people want to marry each other against the family's wishes. So it's, I think that really has to be factored into the way we understand the social in India. The way in which the being with family influences the being with societies.
Does the idea of sameness underlie difference and dissent? It seems that the distress of dissent is primarily with those with whom there is some kind of existential sameness.
Sorry? Can you see the
Does some idea of sameness underlie difference and dissent? It seems that the distress of dissent is primarily with those with whom there is some kind of existential sameness.
Yeah. Okay. Like many other terms, we have to see in what sense we are using the word sameness. The sameness I was using about is the fact about social, about belongingness, being with, right? The sameness I was talking about was one which arises in the true definition of a social space, the public social space, where we just want to be with people who are like us, who think like us, who do not disagree with us, who do not dissent with us, and so on. And that kind of sameness which grounds, this kind of acceptance is related to, is a problem for the sense of being with, the sense of becoming social, right? And that is the context of the sameness I was talking about. It is true that there are different people who are dissenting, who are, let's say, who are being under oppression, who are, under various kinds of oppression, let's say the different groups which may work across class, caste, and gender, may all have a sameness of views, sameness of opinion, sameness of theory, sometimes sameness of experience also. That is not, I agree with that point. It's a very good point. I agree with that. But I'm talking about the sameness which defines the idea of the social. For all these people, they would still like to have not just the same people, the same community of people who are being oppressed to be in their group, but the fact that they can recognize that people of other groups who are also undergoing the same experience should come together, they should be with them. That is the question of diversity which is already present. I don't think any protest and dissent can ever be built on a uniform notion of sameness as its foundation.
The problem of solitude remains with or without digital means. It's asserted by those who come to terms with it, like housewives or metro train drivers or manual scavengers. Being alone in a crowd is often also a pilgrimage context.
Wow, what is that? The question is over, is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, there's some noise coming from that, but okay. Oops. Okay, yeah, the question of isolation is very interesting, actually. I mean, the question of isolation is something which many people also look for, they search for it. As I said, when I first sat in the lockdown, it was just lovely just sitting in the silence, being away from, too many unhappy colleagues all the time. It was really lovely away, being not running into the metro, catching a bus, going here, going there. So, yeah, a sense of, and although that's not true isolation, those mechanisms of separating oneself, they actually make a lot of sense when we are overwhelmed by the social, right? And as I said, it is only when you are completely isolated and in solitary that you begin to recognize the role of the other in these various forms, which is what I was trying to talk about today. So isolation can be seen in different ways. One is just a psychological isolation. You can have children who are isolated within families. People who are isolated within organizations, within colleges, maybe some students, maybe there's a student who nobody else talks to, who feels completely alienated. So those kinds of phenomena are very much present. And I think we often, as a society, we have difficulty trying to understand people who are like that, because we just don't know where to fit them in. What does it mean for them to be isolated? And very often we tend to analyze it entirely in terms of the individual, that particular individual's problems, etc., which I think is a problem, because you need to have a different understanding of what it means to be social in order to be able to make sense of this. So yeah, I would agree with it largely. I don't know, I couldn't get the last part of the question, but I suppose this is something connected to what we were saying.
Negation of being social by the state in the form of lockdown has raised dissent in certain countries. While getting locked down is something unrealistic, it is also considered existentially necessary. Isn't that creation of new abnormal? And do we see a change in meaning of social, though diluted, according to the time and situation?
Yeah, okay. I would say that at least in the nature of society, you can see a change, a small change perhaps. When people have asked me about the change after the COVID, I don't think there's going to be big structural changes at all, because the people who control these big, powerful institutions which sustain the status quo in society are so powerful, like our financial institutions and political institutions. It's not going to be easy to, in any sense, to be able to engage with them. I mean, or to make changes to them, unless there are other systems within themselves which make them change. So, but I do think that I don't think there's going to be any direct great change in the notions of socialities. There is a lot more wariness. There's a lot more looking at another person a little more carefully, staying away from others. And, very interestingly, I think a kind of recognition of the excesses which run their everyday life. I think definitely I see that. But, the power of our consumerist society is that it is going to seduce all of us back into it within the day it all gets over, we'll all be still running into the malls, into the restaurants, and into the pubs and so on. So it's really this very interesting question, the conflict between desire and vulnerability, which I mentioned earlier. And that's why, for Gopal and me, when we wrote the stuff, it was really, seemed to be a very important, a pair of terms which capture the dynamics of the social. This thing between individual desire and wanting to do things that I want to do versus a particular vulnerability which captures the idea of the social. And excuse me, and the kind of dynamics that leads to.
Apologies, further questions have been limited by time. Thank you, sir, for elaborating on your thoughts and engaging with us. There has been much to learn interacting with you. And on that note, I would like to call forward Ms. Sharmi Godalika, second year sociology, to emote some of the very fundamentals of your lecture into poetry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sharmi Godalika, a second year student of the Department of Sociology of Jesus and Mary College. I'll be reciting a self-composed poem which is based on both the theme of our magazine, which is dissent, and on the very insightful lecture delivered by Dr. Sarukkai. Through this poem, I try to understand the experience of an other through my perception. The other over here is an unhappy housewife, and I try to understand her experience of the lockdown. Throughout the poem, I use some dialogues which are part of real conversations that I've had with women during lockdown. The unhappy housewife expresses dissent in her mind, in her inner world. But when it comes to the external world, she's unable to do so because she's paralyzed by social norms and expectations. Throughout the poem, I use the pronoun I to protect their identities and so that we are able to feel her experience as closely as we can. I hope her experience is seen through my poem. The title of my poem is Lockdown, In and Out. I have already been in a lockdown. I live in a room made of mirror walls. I am trapped. I see my reflections becoming the guards of myself. Taunting reflections, reflections that scare me, that instruct me, that question me. A reflection on my wall is just another name for my lockdown. Lockdown on my dreams and my hopes. Lockdown on my independence and my courage. Reflections. Some are shades of imposed duties. The reflection here asks, who will cook for them if I don't? Meanwhile, the reflection there questions my motherhood. Who will look after my child if I don't? Reflections. Some are shades of imposed morality. My reflections tell me to be quiet, to be patient. The reflection here tells me that my God will save me. But sometimes I question it. My God is the same as His. My God is a He. Does my God even understand my pain? My pain, which is though hidden but still there, is out of sight, out of my God's mind as well. Reflections. Some harbor my inability to say no. Some have sheltered my pent-up anger. The reflection here shouts, why can't he just get up and get a glass of water for himself? He told me that that I can't open my tailoring business? Why can't I tell him to understand that that is the only skill that gives me an ounce of hope and independence? Why do his words override my coping? Why do his wants override my needs always? But I have to be quiet. I have to be patient. I am taught to be quiet and patient. Reflections? I am chained to my abuser's home. Reflections? It's a cry of my accepted fate. I have lived a lockdown. I am living a lockdown. I have been living a lockdown since the day I married him. I have been living in a lockdown. Right now, I'm cutting vegetables for self-proclaimed experts. Patriarchy sits on the chair while I sit on the ground. The eternal surveillance of patriarchy on me now. Do this, do that. What are you making today? Why don't you make this? Don't do that, don't do this. Unwanted opinions on food they never cook, unwanted opinions on work they never do. But I have to adjust. I have to be quiet. I'm taught to be quiet and to adjust. What am I doing? Ignoring or internalizing the surveillance? I don't know. Maybe this will become another wall in my suffocating cell. I have already lived a lockdown before. I am living 2 lockdowns now, both in and out. Enormous entitled egos have jeopardized my inner world into chaos. My dim cell looks like a psychiatric ward now. Why am I in the cell? Why am I the victim in the cell? Why is the maniac ego free and powerful? But I have to calm down. I have to be quiet. I am taught to calm down, to be quiet, to be patient, and to adjust. In the dark recess of night, when no one is around, where every voice is silence, I light myself and I look down. For I can't look up, for the roof is as dark and as black as coal. So I look down into the days gone by, into the happiness of my childhood, into the adventures of my youth, into the dreams and hopes of yesterday. I look down, for memory is survival, for nostalgia is escape. I have been living in a lockdown. I am living 2 lockdowns now, both in and out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sharmi. That was a very gripping recital, truly powerful. I would now like to invite Ms. Ananya and Ms. Akshita to propose a very important vote of thanks to all those who made today happen.
Hello everyone. We want to take this opportunity to thank the people who've guided us and given their invaluable contribution to the process of putting this magazine together. Firstly, we are thankful to Ms. Mahima Verma for her constant support throughout the year we spent creating Meraki. Ms. Nivedita Ghosh for facilitating this event with immense enthusiasm, all the faculty members of the department for always motivating us, and Gaurav sir for lending technical support. We also extend our heartfelt gratitude towards Professor Susan Vishwanathan and Mr. Unnamati Shamasundar for letting us interview and present their extremely insightful thoughts on dissent.
Ananya, please unmute yourself.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Right. Hello, everyone. We'd also like to thank our contributors, especially our alumni, Rebecca and Srijana, Taralika Singh for her assistance in the formulation of the e-copy, along with Ishita for the powerful art on the cover. With that, we are very grateful for Professor Sundar Sarukkai for taking out the time to be a part of our virtual launch and celebrating this moment with us. Lastly, to our fellow members of the Editorial Board of Meraki, mentored by Dr. Rennie Thomas and Dr. Jesse Phillip, this wouldn't have been possible without everyone's immense dedication and hard work. Thank you.
So with that, we wrap up today's session. Meraki, the annual magazine of the Department of Sociology, Jesus and Mary College, is officially released. Thank you for joining us. This is Smiley signing off. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Smiley.